great honour then to introduce my friend and buddy. We've been hanging together for a long time now, and we always have a lot of fun. It's never long enough, but as I said last night, the one thing I love about this guy, he's authentic. I think you would have got that. He's authentic, and I love authenticity. I like a person to be as real off the stage as they are on it. And so everything he says, he's honest, he's full on, everything he talks about, he lives. Shane, I love you, man, and it's an honour to have you in this house, and we want you back sooner rather than later, and God bless you. Give him a huge hand clap as he comes to take it tonight.
All right, you guys can be seated. We're going to look at a lot of scriptures tonight, so I've created slides for this. Afterwards, we have our stuff set up at the back with the incredible Christy Vitale. And yes, the only thing I would ask you tonight is if you know you're not going to get anything, God bless you, I'll see you next time. If you know you are, if you could do so in the first 5 minutes afterwards. The reason is I have to tear it down. And so it's just, there's no need for Christy and I to stand there for 35 minutes while people get coffee and then it just slowly meanders over. Normally I don't care, but on the last night, when I have to tear it down, if you could do that for me, that would be fantastic. So I want to talk to you about finance. Now, as soon as I say that, everybody has a different imagination about it. And so tonight's message is a rewritten message. It's a new way I've written to talk about this, because what I realized is that we tend not to deal with the doctrine so much. What we have to deal with more often is people's imagination about that doctrine. So for instance, if I was to say, wives should respect their husbands, no one would disagree with that. No one would say, no, we need more disrespect. But what the problem with that is that in this room, if I count the women, however many women there are, let's say there's 25 women or 30 women or 100 women, whatever, there'd be a certain percentage of them that respect means this, and there'd be another percentage that in their mind respect is this. And then there'd be a certain percentage of women that when you say you need to respect your husband, what you hear is be dominated by him. And so then there's a resistance to that. And so we really aren't really dealing with the word respect. What we're dealing with is everybody's imagination about what that word actually means. Same thing as if I say you husbands should love your wives. Well, no one disagrees with that. No one says, what, we need less love. But the problem with that is that you're not actually dealing with the word love. You're dealing with people's imagination about what that word actually is. And so when I say the word tithe, what imaginations come to your mind? And in a room this size, there'd be a certain percentage of people that when they hear tithe, they hear, wow, freedom from the fear of lack, because generosity destroys the yoke of the fear of lack. And because they've lived it and they've experienced it. Some people, though, when they hear tithe, they hear, oh, the church wants my money. So how could you possibly preach the same message to a group of people about the same topic when one hears freedom and freedom from lack and the other one hears somebody wants to steal from me? And then of course, there'd be another group of people that think, oh, that's the thing you got to do in order for God to bless you. Then there'd be another group of people who would think, their imagination would go, oh, it's like magic. Oh, it's like I can act as stupid as I want. As long as I tithe, God will step in and rescue me and save the day. And then there is a small percentage of people that would be like, do we need to take this down to the furthest decimal point? Like, how do we actually, there's always some pedantic nerd who wants to know the exact math. And it's like, and then in doing that, we miss point. And then there's always going to be some liberal, deeper thinker that's going to go, what is this supposed to be leading to? What's the end goal of this? And so, once again, you've got one doctrine, tithe, but you've got 100 imaginations about what that is, and how in the world are you supposed to deal with that? So, I wrote this I don't think we need further biblical proof about doctrine. I think what happens is when I've talked to people who say, I don't believe in tithing, there's two ways to deal with that. One way would be to get all the scriptures back out and try to be clever enough to convince them, and that works zero. I'm about as I'm about as built for that as I am to be a underwear model or something. I'm just not, I don't have the body for that. The other way to deal with it is to go, hold on. When you say you don't believe in tithing, or you say, I believe in it, but I don't do it. When I say the word tithe, what are you picturing in your head? And what I found is, when I started doing that, what I found is that what they told me tithing was, I didn't believe in that either. I found that to be true about Jesus as well. Some people say, well, I don't believe in Jesus, or I don't believe in God. And instead of getting my dukes up and getting the Bible out and trying to out clever them, and wait, hold on, what I've started doing is I go, oh, tell me what God is like. And they'll go, oh, well, God's this, and this. And I've never, ever had one of them say, not yet, I've never, ever had someone tell me that they didn't believe in God, that by the time they were done telling me what God is, I didn't believe in him either, right? And I just go, oh, yeah, I don't believe in that God either. I agree with you. Yeah, oh, if that's what you mean by God, oh, then no, I'm with you. I'm with you. That God does not exist. I'm with you. And so what I realized is that in communication, when you try to prove the doctrine, but leave people's imaginations at bay, what good have you, even no matter what the topic is, I'm choosing every topic other than finance to prove the point. This is true about everything. Like this is true of God. This is true of Jesus. This is true of forgiveness. When I say forgiveness, everybody believes in the doctrine of forgiveness. Everybody in here. Everybody would believe the finished work of Jesus forgave you of all sins, right? But how many of us in our imagination felt guilty this week? Well, so you believe you're forgiven, but you feel guilty? What good is that, right? And so what I found is that we got to go after the imagination. And so what I want to do with this is try something different. I literally wrote this 3 weeks ago. I want to teach this from an imagination standpoint. I want to talk about the picture and then apply it over the top, which requires us to be contrite. So let's start with asking forgiveness. I'd like to ask for forgiveness for myself, for the church, for anybody that ever taught us that tithing was a certain set of constructs that were destructive. I'd like to apologize to you and ask for forgiveness for anybody in the room that when I say the word tithing, immediately your defenses go up and you have some sort of destructive imagination. That imagination is not your fault. It was put there by somebody who was telling you something about it. And I'd like to ask for forgiveness because I can't change it. So when I think about tithing and finance, I think about three particular abuses. Let me show you the three. That tithe is a rule to attain God's love. So some sort of, I've heard it intimated, no one would actually say it, but somebody might say that it's intimated that God loves tithing people more than he loves non-tithing people, which is why tithing people are more blessed than non-tithing people. That's not new. That's a very old construct. It actually finds its roots in Latin. It's the theological word is bolimus crapimus, right? And if you were taught that by intimation or directly, it created an imagination which became, I have to do this for God to change. Like that if we tithe, God fundamentally changes his basic disposition toward us. No. And with that construct, that falls apart very quickly. And so if you're anti-tithing because you thought if you didn't do it, God would change his disposition towards you, I agree with you. I'm with you. I agree. That the tithe doesn't end in and of itself. This is the decimal point, people. This is the idea that gets intimated. If you just tithe, you've arrived at God's final plan for your financial life. That's not true either. That actually, I'll confess this openly and just for authenticity's sake, I have not tithed in years. I haven't tithed in years. And here's why. Because the tithe was never meant to be an end. It was meant to be a framework to develop a heart of trust and generosity. I haven't tithed in years because 3 years ago, my accountant told me I had to stop giving away so much revenue because it could potentially raise red flags, and it could also potentially be unsustainable. I haven't tithed in years because we've given so much more than that to the poor and the afflicted in the church that the math doesn't even matter anymore. It's become the framework created a construct that now has become an intentional lifestyle choice, so that the tithe actually has no function anymore for me, because it already did what it was meant to do, which was build a framework for a more generous lifestyle, right? And so the tithe is an end to itself now. And the worst to me, the tithe is magic. This is that idea that it gets subtly and not so subtly intimated. If you just tithe, God will fix your financial problems. That is just not true. If you buy things you can't afford with money you don't have to impress people you don't like, you're going to be broke. That's the bottom line. And if you're a tither and you buy a $65,000 car on a $55,000 income, you're just a tithing stupid person. That's what that is. And so the idea that, oh, I can act as stupid as I'd like, and if I just tithe, God will fix it all. Actually, the second temptation of Christ was what? Throw yourself off this mountain. And because God has such a huge plan for you, He'll rescue you. And remember Jesus' response? Jesus' response was what? Well, maybe, but why would I test Him when I could just not jump? The idea is because of where I'm standing, I know I can say this, we believe in supernatural healing here. And if you get lung cancer, we will pray with all of our heart that God will heal you. But we would much rather you quit smoking today than need a miracle in 20 years, right? Like look, if you need a financial miracle every week, there's a better plan for your life. You know, it's called get up before 10 a.m. and you know, work hard, and like it's this kind of thing. The idea that the tithe is magic. And so what I find is that a lot of people that are against tithing, they actually aren't against tithing. They're against the imagination of those three things. They're against this idea. The first one says, it's the law. You have to do it because it's the law. Of course, that falls apart very quickly, because the Bible also says that it's a sin to wear a shirt made of mixed cloth. I mean, that just falls a quick. Sometimes the Bible says it's not your best argument, right? Because you know, the Bible says if you're a foreigner, I could kidnap you and shave your head and clip your nails and force you to marry me. That's in Deuteronomy 21. And so, the first fallacy is like, okay, the Bible says it, but that was the law, and Jesus said it's free from the law. But really, that's not tithing. That's an imaginary construct around tithing that then affects how we feel about it. Your feelings are always determined by your imagination, never by your reality. Never. If you have a 16-year-old and she goes out with her friends tonight, and you say, it's fine, I know where you're going, but be home by 11:30 because where you're going is closed at 11. So I want you to be home by 11:30 because you and your friends are going to be driving around Auckland, right? And she goes, yes, Daddy, right? And 1:30 rolls around and she's not there. And no one she's with is picking up her phone, right? No one. The reality might be that they're just staying out and ignoring you and they're all fine. But your imagination will waver to what? Does your imagination go to the best case scenario or the worst case scenario? Imagination goes to the worst case scenario, and then do your feelings attach to reality or to the imagination? Always the imagination. And so the way we feel about something is largely not determined by the literalness of it, but it's almost always determined by the subjective imagination that we construct around it, right? And so the first one, the first abuse is like, that's the one that goes, oh, this is the law. This is the law. And people say, I'm against it, and I would say, so am I. That idea, so am I. So let's deal with this a little bit better. Next slide. So a couple of observations about this. Money is a great servant, but a horrible master. If I could change your imagination to see money this way. Money is meant to serve you, never you serve it. So if every month your money's telling you what you must do, then that's just another form of slavery. That's bad. The goal for wholeness financially is to every month you tell your money where to go and it goes there. your money goes right there. But if every month your money's going, nope, can't go there. I've got to go to Ford Motor Credit. I've got to go to the mortgage company. I've got to go to MasterCard. I've got to go to Visa. I've got to go to the home equity line. I've got to do that. Then your money's telling you what to do, and you are now controlled by it. But money is a great servant. When you start telling money where to go, like you, money, go buy that piece of property that we're going to use as an investment, and in 25 years, it's going to make us a whole lot of money. Or money, you go bless that orphanage. Or money, you go do that. That's a good situation. In building a Christ-centered community, how we think about our stuff is of utmost importance. If all we want to do is go to heaven when we die. See, this is the first myth. Well, I don't have to tithe to go to heaven. Well, no, but is your main goal to go to heaven? Like, is that it? If I was to say, why are you following Jesus? And is your only answer, well, I'd hate to go to hell when I died? That is absurd and ridiculous and, quite frankly, offensive. Like if Jesus asked you, why are you following me? And your only answer is, I'd hate to go to hell when I died. That's like your wife asking you, why'd you marry me? And your only answer is, well, the other chick was ugly, right? I mean, option B sucked, so I chose you. Like, what? No. You shouldn't, if Jesus asked you, why are you following me? Your answer shouldn't be, I'm following you so I can go to heaven. The answer should be, I'm following you because I love you and I believe your way of living has the best way to live here. Christianity in the first century was about a new way of being in the world. It wasn't about going somewhere else. It was about a new way. I'll give you $1,000. Any person, I'll give you $1,000 who could show me any time Jesus stopped a sermon and asked people to accept him into their heart as their personal Lord and Savior so that they could know they could go to heaven when they died. No, Jesus taught us how to live. Like Jesus was trying to answer the question, how to live here. Now, is there life after death? Yes. Did Jesus affirm it? Yes. Is it important? Yes. Do we embrace that? Yes. But Jesus' primary teaching was what's a way of life here? I mean, anytime Jesus talked about the afterlife, it was sort of like, oh, that's God's business. That let's. I mean, when Jesus presented heaven, he did not present heaven as a place to go when we die. He presented heaven as a place that can be established in you today so that when you go there, when you die, you don't get whiplash. That was the idea, was to have heaven so established in your heart now that when you do walk into heaven one day, it's like, oh yeah, I've been living like this for a while, right? So if that's the case, then how we think about our stuff is very, very important. Number 3, the seemingly small choices we make today affect big things tomorrow. The way to change your life permanently is not to make big shifts. It's to make consistent, small adjustments that along the way create huge change later. Like if your goal is to make it to the end of the day without dying, then do whatever you want to do as long as it doesn't kill you. But if your goal is far out, let's take money for instance. If your goal is to have enough money at 65 to stop working for the rest of your life, that's a reasonable goal, right? But that requires small things here. If you're spending $6 a day on coffee, that doesn't fit that goal. $6, you go to these coffee shops, $6 for coffee. Coffee costs about 20 cents to make. $6. Here's what happens. 14 minutes, you're slightly more alert. 20 minutes later, you have to pee. That's what it is. It's $6 for the opportunity to pee. That's what it is. And for $6 more, they'll let you ride that ride all day long. Here's the problem with that. If your goal at 65 is to have a lot of money, then $6 a day, you can't spend $6 a day on pee. Right? You can't do it. $6 a day invested from 18 to 62 at the average market return from 1919 to today is $1.1 million. Hope you like the coffee. Right? Like if you get on a plane in Auckland and you're heading to Whangarei, don't be correcting me. It's the meeting where I talk and you. I'm just kidding. You get in a plane in Auckland and you're heading to Whangarei, and you're 1 degree off course. Welcome to Kerry or something, right? But if you get on a plane in Auckland heading to LA and you're 1 degree off course, welcome to Mexico. It's a totally different country, right? Because the small choices you make today affect big things later, which requires a few questions for us to invigorate our imagination. Next slide. How did you get what you have? There's only a few ways to attain things, two that I could think of. One is to work for it and earn it. The other way is someone gave it to you. If you drove a car here tonight and you worked for it and paid for it, it's yours. Or if you drove a car here tonight and someone gave it to you, it is also yours. If you drove a car here tonight and you did not work for it, nor did someone give it to you, I would suggest you stole it, right? So the primary question we have to ask is how did we get what we have? When we imagine our life, do we see our life as, this is the life I've created, I worked for it, I earned it? Or do we see everything we have as a gift from God? It's mine because God gave it to me. Which leads me to this question, are we stealing? Stealing, thou shalt not steal in Hebrew, two meanings. First meaning, taking something that is not yours. Obvious. Second meaning, though, is withholding something meant for somebody else. Because if it's yours and you work for it and earned it, then this doesn't apply. But if we see our life, that all of our life is a gift from God, then if God asks us to give something to somebody and we put it in our pocket, that is theft. If I own the business and I say, hey, take this and drop this off back there, and on your way back there you slide it in your pocket, that is stealing. That's stealing. And the third question is this: do you need more than a touch from God? And I would say you do. And that's another thing. This is that magic one. They get subtly intimated. Hey, I don't care what position you're in. All you need is a touch from God. No, you need a touch from God, and you need to go to a doctor. I don't care what you're going through. All you need is a touch from God. No, you need a touch from God, and you probably need a marriage counselor. I don't care what financial position you're in. All you need is a touch from God. No, you need a touch from God, and you need to make a commitment not to do stupid things with money from here on out. Because, let's say it this way, God is not duty-bound to fix stupid. Like, that's the problem, is the idea that I can act as foolishly as I'd like, and I can presume upon God's grace to fix my stupidity because I tithe. We got to change that imagination because it falls apart. People lose their faith in tithing. I've talked to lots of people. I used to tithe, but I don't anymore. Why? Because it doesn't work. What happened? Well, I tithed, and I wasn't blessed. Well, tell me about your life. Did you have a car payment? Did you run up credit card debt? Did you work hard? Well, no. Yes. Well, what did you expect God to do? They actually don't have a problem with tithing. They have a problem and being disappointed with their imagination they built around tithing to fix all this stuff that it's not meant to do. Nor is he duty-bound to finish something he did not initiate. People say, the Bible says, he who began a good work in you, be faithful to complete it. Yes, he who began it. Like, if God did not initiate it, God is not duty-bound to finish it. That doesn't work. So let's look at that next slide. So when the Jewish people think about money, they think about 5 prongs. It's a multifaceted thing. Most things are multifaceted. No, anybody talk about most things that make it, it's just this one secret. Anytime you see a Facebook ad, here, tune in here for the one secret. No. Life just doesn't work that way. They think about it as 5 prongs. Work, wisdom, honor, knowing God, and developing a lifestyle of generosity. Now, we could spend an hour on each one, and I don't want to do that. So let's just, I'll talk through it this way. 1, work. There's a cure for being broke. It's called get a job. It's called get up before 10. It's called, at the job you're doing, do a really good job. It's called act like you own the place, and one day you will own the place. It's called do everything you can do mightily and heartily as to the Lord and not unto men. It's called being honest. It's called having integrity. It's called show up on time. It's called don't steal office supplies. It's called don't start dissension amongst the office culture. It's called that. It's called be the go-to person. It's called, ready? When employees tell me they start complaining about the lazy people in their work, they don't pull their own weight, da-da-da-da-da. Can I give you a new imagination for that? If you work at a place and there are people employed who aren't pulling their weight, thank God for them. That's job security for you. Hello. You actually want people not to perform as highly as you because that helps you stand out to the boss, right? So just think about that. So work, Second one is wisdom. Wisdom would be things like get out of debt. Don't borrow money for things going down in value. Cars, boats, sea-doos, and their sisters. If you can't pay for it, don't. A general rule of thumb is if all your toys in your life, these are things with wheels or that require wheels to move them. If all the toys in your life add up to a combined value of more than half of your annual income, you cannot afford it. You got too much of your income tied up in things going down in value, even if you have no debt on them. And you should never have debt on them. Wisdom is not trusting the government to do something for you that you could do for yourself. In the history of the world, governments have never been great providers because governments are called to be protectors. But when governments fulfill their call to protect, they do a good job. But when they try to be the providers, it doesn't work. You can go all the way back to the book of Genesis when Joseph said, I'm going to raise taxes 20%, so when the famine hits, I'll give you the food back. And so he raised his taxes 20%, and when the famine hit, what did he do? He sold it back to them. And they ended up, and by the end of the story, it says, so Joseph reduced the entire of Egypt to slavery. It's just, and Joseph was good-hearted. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Wisdom. Honor. Honor is things like don't ever intentionally do harm. That if there's only one God and God is holding me together and God is holding you together, then if I intentionally harm you, then I'm actually hurting myself because there's only one God holding us all together. You cannot win at life harming others. You'll never meet someone whose default button is to be negative and to gossip and to slander who wins, because people will stop doing business with that person. They'll stop investing with that. Eventually, people who hold the rule, well, once you mess up with me, I cut you off. Well, good luck being alone. I mean, I'm talking lonely, because eventually you got to let people fail. Honor. The two I want to focus on tonight, though, is knowing God and developing a lifestyle of generosity. But knowing God and developing a lifestyle of generosity will not lead to financial freedom without the first three. And the first three don't lead to a fulfilled life without the last two. Does that make sense? So they all are required. Would Christy, one of you two, would you mind getting me a bottle of water? Is that okay? I don't know. I think I drank this coffee, and that was just a bad idea. Knowing God and developing a lifestyle of... No, this was free. That was. Here you go, Shane. Thank you for coming. Next slide. So this is Jeremiah 22:16. As far as I know, this is the only scripture in the whole Bible that defines what it means to know God. As far as I know, it is intimated one other place. I'll tell you about that in a second. Jeremiah 22:16. He defended the cause of the poor and the needy, so it all went well. Is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord your God? The only definition I can find in the whole Bible of what it means to know God is when you do something for someone who could do nothing in return for you. And that makes sense, because isn't that what God did for the world? That he did something for the world, they could do nothing in return. So when we do something for someone and they can do nothing in return for us, is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord your God? This should bring a lot of things into play. Jesus was nice to everybody. Like people caught in the act of adultery, he's like, stuff happens, don't do that again. There was a lady divorced 5 times and shacked up with the 6th one, and he's like, would you like a drink? You look like you could use a drink. Jesus is nice to everybody except for rich people overlooking poor people. Anytime Jesus starts a parable or a story or something like that with a rich guy with no name overlooking poor people outside of his gate, it just doesn't go well. Matthew 25, when Jesus talks about how he's going to judge the world, he says that what they did to the least of these, they did it to me. Matthew 7, that's the scariest scripture in the whole Bible to me, is Jesus says, at the end of the day, many will say, Lord, Lord, and I'll say, I just didn't know you. And they'll say, well, we prophesied and cast out devils and cast out demons and performed miracles. So Jesus does not equate moving in power or calling him Lord as knowing him. Knowing him was what you did for the least of these. So before we go any further, if you had to face Jesus today, do you know him? If you had to face Jesus today, would you be on the right or on the left? Do you know him? Because what good does it do to gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? What good does it do to make all the money in the world if there's no outlet to bless other people? What difference does that make? Next slide. Generosity, developing a heart of generosity. The word generosity in Hebrew is tzedakah. Now here's the play on words. The word righteousness in Hebrew is tzedak. The word generous in Hebrew is tzedakah. Same exact word. 2,106 verses of Scripture connect righteousness to generosity. That's more than prayer, faith, heaven, and hell combined. So in Matthew 25, when Jesus said, "So I will say to the righteous, come in," and then they said, "What did we do to be righteous?" And he goes, "You were generous to the least of these." That's a Hebrew concept. Righteousness and generosity were the same exact thing. So there's 2,106 verses. I chose not to show them all to you, just because I figured you'd get irritated. Next slide. So here's just a few. "I've been young and now I'm old, yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken or his seed begging bread. For all the day long he deals generously." All day long he deals generously. Now in Hebrew, that would just say a righteous man shows, a tzedak man shows tzedakah. In Psalm 112, verse 5, it says a righteous man shows generosity. Obviously, in Hebrew, that would say a tzedak man shows tzedakah. A righteous person was generous. In Jesus' world, it was impossible to be righteous and greedy. It did not work. That would be an oxymoron. Hey, there's a greedy righteous man. What? No, that didn't even work. They actually had a first century euphemism for it. It was called the evil. Are we under attack? They called it the evil eye. The evil eye was a euphemism for being stingy. The etymology of the phrase, "Don't give me the evil eye," is "Don't be greedy with me." It just was impossible. Next slide. This is James chapter 1. "If anyone considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself and his religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress." In other words, religion that God accepts is a religion that doesn't just believe the right things, but somehow those beliefs translate into helping others. Is this not what it means to know me? The only other place I can find about knowing God is 1 John chapter 5. He says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loves is born of God and knows God." Once again, it's tied, though, to loving each other. It's tied to how you treat your fellow man. And next slide. So here was obviously there's not two number ones. Sorry about that when it converted. Here was their framework. I'll call it what it is. I'm trying to change the imagination of this. This wasn't the rule. This was the framework to build a tzedakah spirit into us, right? And so they called this tzedakah. So this is what they would do. The first thing they would do is they would give something called a teruma offering. A teruma offering, summary-wise, was 1/40th, and in our world, it would go to your pastor. All right. So the smallest offering by far was the highest and holiest offering, and it sanctified all other offerings. Okay? So that was called the teruma. Then there were tithing. Now, when I say the word tithe, once again, however many people in the room, I'm quite happy with this turnout for a Saturday night. There's however many imaginations about what tithing is. But the problem with that is in English there's only one word, tithe. In Hebrew there's three words. The three words are ma'aser rishon, ma'aser sheni, and ma'aser ani. Ma'aser rishon was 1/10 to the church, to your church community. The ma'aser sheni, though, was 1/10 to yourself. Now, once I realized this helped my imagination about how tithing worked. That God was just as interested in me saving money as he was in me giving money. Well, that helps. That helps a lot. And by the way, it's flippin' smart. Like if you're over the age of 55, if you had saved 10% of your income your whole life, how much money would you have today? The answer is a flippin' lot. I did this my whole life. I did not know about the teruma, but my mother, since I was 4, thank God for her, my mom, since I was 4, made me tithe to the church, Ma'aser Rishon, and she made me tithe to myself, Ma'aser Sheni. And she didn't even know about it being in the Bible. She just knew that was good sense, right? So if my grandmother gave me $1, my mother would drive. I think about it now as an adult. The effort mom went to teach me something, a framework that became part of my life. To where, by the time I was an adult, I didn't think about tithing. It was so natural. It was so ingrained. I was 28 years old before I realized every person didn't save 10% of their income. I thought it was a rule. Like I thought it was like national law or something. My mom would take me, break it to 10 dimes, 10-cent pieces. I'd give 10 cents to the church. She would then drive me to the bank. Well, I can't read or write yet. She would drive me to the bank, and in front of me, she would help me fill out a deposit slip for 10 cents. She opened a savings account, and we would put that because she wanted to build that behavior into me. I have never, not once, made a wage that would make any of you go, wow! Holy smokes. I've always been a pastor. I've never made a gigantic wage, but I've saved 10% of my income my whole life. And now at 42, it's taken this long, but now the compounding interest is really, really, really starting to work. And when I look at, when my wealth manager shows me the graph about where this thing's going, but it requires, it was never a whole lot. It was never a big amount. It was just steady, consistent, intentional tithing to myself. But here's my question, to be honest. When I say tithing, is there any person in the room that when I said tithing, you immediately thought investing? It's not in our imagination, and that's listen, please forgive me for that. Forgive me for whoever taught us tithing. That's our fault. If all you ever heard about tithing was give to the church, 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 give to the church. Well, wait a minute, that's only 1/4 of the story. The other parts of the story is, hey, give to yourself, give to yourself, give to yourself, give to yourself, give to yourself. Why do you think the Jews have all the money? 1% of the world's population, 30% of the world's wealth. They might be onto something. And most of them don't even believe in Jesus. They just work look, you say that these principle works. Truth is truth no matter what banner it's under. They have saved so much money in their life, they don't even give inheritances to their children. They give it to their children's children. Because in Jewish wisdom, if your child needs the inheritance, he wasn't worth it anyway. Right? He'll blow it. Just brilliant stuff. So 1/10 to the church, 1/10 to yourself, and then the Master Annie was 1/10 to the poor. This was given in lieu of every third Master Sheni. In other words, every third self-tithe, instead of giving it to yourself, you give it to the poor. So it's a great time of year for me to talk about this. So January and February, I give 1/10 to myself. In March, instead of giving the 1/10 to myself, I'm meant to give it to the poor, but I just do both. I just double it, right? So we just double it. And now this is so past the framework. Now we're given to orphans every single. It's an amazing life to be able to bless people like we are. And I love it. I love it. But this is the beginning framework. This was the framework we were meant to live in. So the teruma was 1/40 to your pastor. The Master Rishon was 1/10 to the church. The Master Sheni was 1/10 to ourselves. And then the Master Annie was 1/10 to the poor. That was given in lieu of every third self-tithe. So let's talk about this a bit. Next slide. Once again, I don't want to talk about the doctrine. I could put 100 scriptures up there. I'm going to do this different. Let's do this different. In Jesus' world, being a Christian was more about a new way of being in the world than it was about going somewhere else. We talked about that a second ago. In Jesus' world, the focus was less on what do you believe and more on how do you believe what you believe, right? Those are two different things. You can believe in the cross and resurrection, but the way you live that doesn't affirm it for all people, we've missed something. In Pentecostal circles, you can believe in being baptized in the Holy Spirit and speaking in tongues, but then you could mistreat the waitress at the store. So you're just a tongue-talking jerk. What does that do? It wasn't, to Jesus, Christianity wasn't a group of people who have all the right thoughts in their heads. Like, you never ever hear Jesus go, okay, before we move on, I need everybody to agree with me. No, he just says, no, let's just go do some kindness. Let's go do stuff. This is better. To Jesus was less concerned about the what you believe, like getting the right thoughts in your head, and more concerned with how you believe what you believe. How does what you believe translate into how you treat other people? So let's say it another way. Next slide. To be against tithing is like saying, I find no responsibility to my community, my family, or the poor. I will live isolated from the dance. So when someone says to me, I don't believe in tithing, I just go, okay, and I ask them what their imagination is. But then if it comes down to it, I'll just say, so do you find any responsibility for your community? Like, do you not play a part at all? Like, the way the ancient people framed our life was a divine dance. That when to step up, when to step back, when to honor, when to submit, when to take your turn, when to give, when to promote somebody else. They called it a perichoresis, a divine dance. And so the question is are you going to be a part of the dance, or are you going to stand on the sideline? Like, look, if someone was to say, let's say there's no such thing as the Bible, just for a second. Let's just say the Bible doesn't exist, just for a second. If someone was to say, you know what, guys? I find no responsibility to my community. I find no responsibility to the financial health of my family in the future, and I find zero responsibility for taking care of the poor and the afflicted. What would you call that person? Well, not stupid as much as jerk, selfish. Like you're in this world, bro. You have a part to play. This world's like a dance, man. And you're going to either be a part of the dance or you're going to stand on the sideline like a wallflower. But my goodness. So really, you realize when I frame it that way in your imagination, no person has a problem with tithing. No person that's reasonable would go, I have no responsibility to my community, myself, or the poor. People would actually say the opposite. I've actually heard people say the opposite. I don't believe in tithing, but I do participate with my community, and I give a lot, and I do save and invest, and I'm very, very generous to the poor. Well, mate, you don't need to tithe. You're actually doing what the tithe was meant to set up as a framework to do. To be a functioning part of any, I should have said that a little different. To be a functioning part of any part of creation. Okay, that makes a little sense. To be a functioning part of any part of creation, we must master the art of giving and receiving. This isn't just true of tithing or money. This is true of breathing. Like if you breathe out, it's receiving air. If you breathe in, it's receiving air. At some point, you got to breathe out. You got to receive, you got to give. Like if the trees were to say, we're going to stuff the human race, we're going to quit breathing out, and that's going to show them. What would happen to humanity? We would die. But then what would happen to the trees? They would die. They need us. We need them. It's giving and receiving. It's true of eating. If you eat 3 meals a day and never go to the bathroom, I would suggest you're going to die. Or you're going to wish you were dead, right? Because a brother's got to receive. But then at some point, a brother's got to give. Why? Because to be alive means you have to, right now you're giving and receiving the whole time you've been sitting here. In, out, you ate, you give, the only thing on earth they can work out that receives without giving is the Dead Sea. It has nowhere to go, so everything, you can't live in there. So this isn't just about money. This is about just being a part of creation. That actually tithing is a framework by which we participate in something intentionally that's actually just a reasonable part of all of creation. Let's say it another way. Next slide. Tithing is an excellent framework to work out a heart and lifestyle of generosity in my life. The idea isn't like since I've learned it, I've always honored Teruma, and I can tell you it's done nothing but good things in my life. But I haven't intentionally thought about it anymore. It's such a part of, like the theological word for it would be the word becoming flesh. The idea that a concept becomes natural. Like if you're 10 years into this and you're still thinking about the decimal point tithing, I would suggest that you're missing the point. That tithing is a framework that is meant to create an intentional heart of generosity and lifestyle of generosity, or tzedakah, in my life. The goal is for the word to become flesh. The framework is meant to develop trust and tzedakah. The goal is not to be a tither. The goal is to be a trusting, generous person that sees God as the source of all things, and we're completely connected to our role in the dance that is the world. Is what's in front of us my responsibility to the community, or my responsibility to my family, or my responsibility to the poor and the afflicted, or my responsibility to my pastor? Generosity is simply this. Here's tithing in a nutshell. Take care of your pastor, take care of your church, take care of yourself, and take care of the poor before you take care of MasterCard and Visa. Like, who's against that? Who doesn't want in on that? It has nothing to do with law or anything like that. It has everything to do with, are you dancing or are you standing on the sideline? Are you giving and receiving? Are you a functioning part of creation? That's what this is about. Next slide. So here's some principles, I think, that are coming. Yep. So principles are giving and receiving. To be a functioning member of any part of creation, we have to master the art of giving and receiving. So my question is, have we mastered that? The second principle is echad. Echad is a special Hebrew word that means unity in diversity. The idea is that if even the smallest part of an organism chooses not to participate, the organism dies. And we are not the exception to the rule, right? So we talk about God as being huge, like God is big, God is massive, God's so big, man. God's huge, God's big. Yes, but God's also small. Like God is holding all. If God's holding all of creation together, that means he has to be flowing between the subatomic particles that they haven't built a microscope yet big enough to see it. So yes, is God big? Yes. Is God small? Yes. This is how fragile life can be. Something the size of a grain of sand can shut you down if it gets stuck in your kidneys. Right? If you've ever had a kidney stone, you understand what's going on here. I think I told you about this last night. I had a 8-hour food bolus. It required a overnight stay in a hospital on the Sunshine Coast. You know what it was? It was a little bitty piece of steak that got stuck in scar tissue at the bottom of my esophagus and would not go down, and my esophagus closed over the top of it. And I don't know if you ever had that happen, but when it does, your body freaks out. I don't know if you've ever noticed how much spit you make in a minute. The answer is a lot. Because when your esophagus shuts off and there's nowhere for that spit to go, it's all coming this way. I was the speaker at a gigantic thing. It was a Friday night. There was 400 people waiting for me to come out. And I was in the green. They were singing. They're singing. They're waiting for me to come out. And I'm in the bathroom over the toilet with water just pouring out of my mouth because there was nowhere for it to go. Do you know how embarrassing that was? You know how embarrassing it was for them to march an ambulance? Thank goodness they had a back door. And the pastor said, "Don't march him out like this in front of everybody. We're going to honor his dignity here." And I ended up being okay. But my point is, one small piece of steak decided not to play ball with the rest of my body, and it shut it down. Actually, this has been proven scientifically in the 70s. A guy proved something called the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect proved, theoretically, that if even the puff of air generated from a butterfly's wing, if it went uncorrected, it would cause a meteorological disaster 100 miles away. The idea that if all the butterflies in Auckland got together and said, "Let's show Taronga what we're made of," if no force corrected that, Taronga would have a meteorological disaster. It's almost like the whole world has to be in somebody else's hands. What does this mean? It means that if even the smallest part of creation chooses not to participate in the dance, it has catastrophic effects. So when the world says, "Where's God? How can God be true with all the suffering in the world?" I think God's going, "What? Where's my body? Where are they? Where's all the individual parts that I gave all the resources of the world to? Why is it that 3 people are richer? Why is it that the richest 3 people in America are richer than the bottom 170 million? Why is that? And yet I'm the failure? I don't think I'm the failure. I'm only the failure if I withheld the resources necessary to fix the world. But according to Forbes magazine, the richest 40 people in the world have more money than the GDP of every nation in the world except for the top 10 economies. The richest 1% have more money than the GDP of the entire world. In other words, the top 1% of the world have enough money to keep the global economy working for a year at its current rate. And God's the failure? I think not. What's happening is individual parts are choosing not to participate in the dance. And that can't be. Giving and receiving, echad. The other principle is tikkun olam, the repairing of the world. This is a specific rabbinical phrase, the tikkun olam, the repairing of the world. It's sort of like this. If a 4-year-old drew you a picture and said, Mommy, I drew you a picture. Well, unless that 4-year-old is highly gifted, that picture is going to be terrible. But you don't tell her it's terrible because you have a soul. So you look at the picture and you go, oh, this is beautiful. What a great picture. You don't even know what it is. And you say, what is it? And she says, it's a windmill. And it doesn't compute to her that if you can't tell what it is, it's not a great picture, right? She's just happy you like it. And so she hands you a marker or whatever, and she says, you draw. What do? Do you crumple the paper up, throw it away, draw a perfect windmill, and go, that's how it's done? No. What you would do is you would enter into her broken picture and you would make it better. That's how the New Testament writers frame what Jesus did for the world. That he did not come into the world to destroy the brokenness of the world, but rather to enter into the brokenness of the world so that the world could be fixed through him. The word was tikkun olam. Jesus did not come into the world to destroy it, but to fix it. And he's doing a heck of a job. He's doing a heck of a job. The world is getting better in every single feasible category. You should see the research on it. It's getting better. Today, even today, I saw a graph on the murder rate from 1300 till today. I'm telling you. See, people say, there's more murder today than ever. No, there's not, first. Second, even if that was true, the population of the world is 10 times bigger than it was. So total amounts, that's not how you measure murder rates. You measure murder rates as deaths per 100,000 people. And when you look at it that way, the graph on murder from 1300 to 2015, when it gets to 2015, you can't even see it. It's just that. It's so minuscule. Death by war, same way. The world's getting better. Why? Because the Spirit of the risen Christ is at work in this world, and he is at work fixing it. This world is infinitely better than it's ever been. And it's still got a long way to go, and it's going to go somewhere great. It's good. It's good. Sadak, fourth principle, Sadak. Sadak was generosity and righteousness. So with those four principles, when I say tithing, here's what I mean when I say tithing, or teruma, or Sadak. Here's what I mean. I mean that we are intentionally engaging in a framework that hopefully is temporary because we're going to get so much reinforcement from it, it's going to become just a lifestyle. And in that framework that becomes a lifestyle, we're mastering the art of giving and receiving. We're participating in the echad of the universe, and we're saying yes to the infinite possibilities to partner with the risen Christ to fix the world. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about taking responsibility for our community, taking responsibility for our family, taking responsibility for our role in feeding the poor and the afflicted, and taking our responsibility to make sure our pastor is blessed. Who's against that? Let's say it this way. Next slide. Couple questions. Are we participating in the bigger story of God's unfolding grace to the world, or are we sitting out? Are you in the dance, or are you out? Are we in the dance, or are we out? Do we trust God as our source? See, great sermons aren't meant to be agreed with. I don't care if you agree with me or disagree with me, really. I care if you're willing to wrestle with it, because it doesn't affect my life. Whether you agree with me or not, it doesn't affect my life, but your ability to wrestle with these things and change our imagination changes everything. Do we trust God as our source, or do you struggle with it? And it's okay to struggle with it. It's okay to go, you know what, I don't know that I trust God as my source. I don't know. Am I saving for my future? And listen, if you're getting into your late 20s, you better start. You get old faster than you think. I swear, I know to some of you I'm old, to some of you I'm young, but 42, I remember clearly a day I thought 42 was old. And now I'm 42, and I know I'm old, because I want to do things like go to bed early. Like somebody asked me the other day, you want to go to a movie? And I said, sure, what time does it start? They said 8:45. I was like, do you ever do that? Only over 40 people do that, right? Am I saving for the future? Because believe me, when you get my age, if you haven't started, it starts to feel overwhelming and despairing. Now look, with that said, if you're 77 and haven't started, do whatever you'd like. It doesn't matter. It's too late. But am I saved for the future? Next one. What have we done recently for someone who can do nothing in return? Like, at least be willing to ask the question. In the last 30 days, have I done something for someone who could do nothing in return for me? Maybe the best question is, do we know him? If we had to face Jesus today, do we know him? And last one, are you willing to start today working a framework to develop a generous spirit? Listen to that word very carefully. Start a framework that's meant to develop an intentional lifestyle of generosity. I would hope if you started today, that in 5 years' time, you wouldn't have to think about tithe at the church, tithe to myself, make sure to honor. I would hope not, because the dance is so fun that it just becomes a lifestyle. Because the goal is not to go to heaven when you die. The goal is to have heaven established in you now so that when you go to heaven when you die, you don't get whiplash. And heaven's a big dance, so you may as well be participating. All right? So that's the teaching. I hope you enjoyed it. I've told Don that since we didn't do music tonight, I'll take a few minutes and take questions. A couple of things on questions, okay? First, it needs to be a question. If you make a statement, that's your opinion, and for tonight, no one cares. Secondly, it needs to be a question. Secondly, good Q&As are limited in scope. In other words, this is not the time to ask me why your cousin has cerebral palsy, okay? I care, and that's something that can be talked about, but it doesn't fit tonight. The questions need to fit the topic, or maybe some sort of Bible thing that you've been thinking about, all right? But it needs to be about the Bible or generosity or finance, something like that. It's something that invigorated in your mind as we were talking about this, something like that. And, one other thing, it needs to be non-antagonistic and mutually edifying. In other words, I'm not going to argue with you. And two, it needs to be a question that you think, you know what, I bet the whole room's wondering this. Who'd like to go first? Yeah. Ease up now. Have we missed it? Okay. I'm just going to ask you to clarify the question. What is it you think they've missed?
Steve. I think there's been an awful lot of what you said at the start of do this and God will bless you. I've heard it so many times.
Yeah.
If you just tithe, God will put in money into your bank and you'll get this and you'll get that. There's been all this, and I've never heard what you've said tonight.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Yeah. So it's not that what they're saying is wrong. Is God going to bless you? Yes, but if I'll use a hyperbole to make the point. If God gave, just for the sake of hyperbolic example, if God gave every person in Auckland $10 million, what percentage of them would know what to do with it? The ones with $10 million now. Like, here's the simple stats. 91% of all lottery winners are bankrupt within 5 years of winning the lottery. And that's more than 10 million. Which what that means is that the science behind this is only 9% of people know what to do with more than $1 million anyway. So the fallacy is that that all you need is God's blessing. Will God bless you? Sure. But that's not all you need. You got to have some sense and some wisdom and work ethic and honesty and integrity and a conscious decision to be a part of the dance and so when anything like that becomes one-dimensional, it loses all of its power. And by the way, that's not just true of finance either. It's true of the cross. It's true of resurrection. Like if when we think of resurrection, if all we think about is the literal bodily resurrection of Christ, and we set our whole life about to prove that he literally rose, well, okay, and I believe that, by the way, but if my belief in the literal resurrection of Jesus doesn't somehow get wrapped up in a whole lot of meaning, and to where that whole lot of meaning then becomes an event. An event is not something that happens. An event is something that changes the way you see all other happenings after that. Otherwise, if all you care about is the literal resurrection of Jesus without meaning or event, why don't you just worship Lazarus? He rose first, right? So we all know that yes, we embrace the literal resurrection of Jesus, but we all know that all the power of it is in the infinite meanings of it. Like death doesn't get the last word, Jesus does, and there's a new creation bursting forth in the middle of this one. And surprise can be a part of your life, because if you were wrong about death, what else could we be wrong about? And it's, they're da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So then the resurrection becomes an evental thing, not just a literal thing. And because all truth has to have three things. It has to have an objective element, a subjective element, and an evental element. And if you remove any of the three, even if it's true, it loses part of its power. And I think that's what's happened in the finance teachings, is it gets one-dimensional without the other three, and then it sort of starts to lose its stuff. Because, look, whether I'm totally right or totally wrong is irrelevant and up for discussion. But you would agree that the way I just talked about it is more compelling, right? So, and the reason it's more compelling is because it's multidimensional, and it has a flow of giving and receiving and this, that, and the other. And so, but a lot of it, I mean, we do realize that most people just teach what they were taught. There's very few original thinkers, very few, and so, we also got to remember and be humble and go, there was a day I thought that. Yeah, there was a day. That was me too. Yeah, me too. Yeah. Hashtag me too. Yep. Hi. yeah. Here comes a mic, sir.
Thanks. So as a young Christian, I used to get really fearful after reading the story of Ananias and Sapphira selling the property.
Yes.
Could you?
Well, that is a little scary, isn't it?
Yes. Could you put in some context around what you spoke tonight? And
Sure. Yeah. If you lie about what you give, God might destroy you. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so it's in the Bible. Bazinga. Okay, so all right. So a couple thoughts on Ananias and Sapphira. One, it is in us. The psychological term for this is Gestalt Theory. Gestalt Theory says that your brain is hardwired to connect dots with the empty spaces between dots. Your brain will see the dots connect, which is why in a connect the dots thing when you're a kid, way before you finish it, you sort of see right. It's just in your head. It's Gestalt Theory. So in any story, if something happens here and something happens here, and something happens here, and something happens here, Gestalt Theory would say that our brain, as we read the story, attempt to connect those dots in a way that makes the whole story make sense. Okay, so I'll give you an example of this from another place, and then I'll talk about Ananias and Sapphira. And I'm using this because I've preached this here, and I'm thinking more people would be familiar with it. Bethesda, right? The Pool of Bethesda, right? So the Pool of Bethesda, if you go back and look at John chapter 5, somebody asked me about it at lunch. It says an angel of our Lord did it, and all I did was pull up the NIV, John chapter 5. It's only 14 verses, and I said, just read that out loud. Not there. It's not there, and it's definitely not in the original language. The original language, it just says occasionally a messenger would stir the water. But my point is that if something's stirring the water, the most obvious way for that to happen is if God's making this sort of happen, right? Of course, Bethesda, if you haven't heard the message, was a pagan place. And the way I know that is because if you go to Jerusalem today and go to Bethesda, there's a big billboard telling you the whole story, and it says pagan medicinal baths. And for those of you in the room that have heard me preach it and saw the picture, would you at least give me a little bit of okay, good for the people who didn't. Okay, so Ananias and Sapphira, first of all, what I've heard said about it is what I just made fun of, which is God will, and I've heard questions asked like, why is God still destroying people in the New Testament, right? If you go back and read the story, first, it never ever says God killed them. It's not there. We extrapolate that in our mind, but it's not there. And I would suggest it's still in us today to think that. For instance, if a really bad man came in here right now with a gun, how he got a gun in New Zealand, I don't know, but he's got one, right? And he said, give me all your money. He's got 2 accomplices with him. They got these big buckets, and everybody's throwing their purses and cell phones in the buckets. You know, so everybody's doing it. Shoot, they got the. And he's paranoid. He's sort of whacked out of his head. And y'all stay put. Nobody move. Nobody move. Nobody move. Nobody move. He's backing out, and he's walking backwards into the street. And an 18-wheeler he doesn't see smashes him. You know? How many of us would think, that's right, God got him, right? Right? But God didn't get him. You can't walk into a busy street backwards, right? Right? So, just the truth. So first of all, it never ever says God killed them. Here's all it says. It says that they lied about what they gave. That's what you know happened. And it says that Peter confronted them in public, and they died. Now, a couple things about this. That's all it says, by the way. Everything else is extrapolated. We do this all the time. Like, anytime someone talks to me about hell, all I do is go, and by the way, I believe in hell. But when I hear somebody talk about hell having and they're so sure about it, I just go, where'd you read that? They'll always go, in the Bible. I'll go, where? They can't find it because someone made it up, right? The Bible mentions hell 9 times in the whole Bible. Right? I've memorized all 9, but that's not for tonight. But everything I believe about hell, I try to keep it in those 9, right? But here's the thing, because I don't want my Gestalt, I don't want my imagination creating something that isn't there. So here's what happened in that story. They lied about what they gave. Peter confronted them about it in public, and they died. And by the way, that story was written decades later through eyewitness accounts. Luke wasn't there. Luke's writing it through eyewitness accounts, and, there's all kinds of things going on there. I heard a rabbi teach that passage once, and he said the lessons in that passage is when you're building a Christ-centered community, authenticity is of utmost importance. So don't be unauthentic, because that can kill you. But the main lesson is that, because think about who confronted them in public? Peter. Was Peter given to overreaction or underreaction in his life? He's denying Jesus 3 times, saying swear words the Romans were covering their ears for. He's later fishing naked, which is like in the top 2 things never to do, right? You don't want to fish naked or cook bacon naked. Those are the 2 things, right? He's fishing. I mean, you got grown men. I mean, he's out there naked, right? A guy comes to arrest Jesus, and Peter's rational response is, let's chop his ear off. This guy is a bit reactionary. I like him. So Peter confronts them hard in public, and they die. I heard one rabbi teach it, and he said, actually, the lesson from it is celebrate people in public. And if you have to confront them in private. Because when you confront people in public, sometimes they don't survive it. What may have happened is the stress of being exposed to their whole entire world killed them. Now, we extrapolate God killed them, but it doesn't say that. It just says Peter confronted them in public, and they died.
Yeah, just a question. When you were talking about the actual divvying up of the income that you earn,
yeah.
can you just put that into simplistic
Real numbers?
terms? Yeah, because me being a very simplistic sort of an individual,
Okay, yeah.
and not very good at mathematics.
No, that's good.
Would be good.
Do you
So if I had
mind,
if you had $1,000,
Yeah, easy.
how would you divvy that
Yeah,
up?
do you mind putting that slide back up? It's the one that says Teruma, Master Rashawn, Master Shani, Master Annie. Yeah. Oh, man, how fast she is. She's like Zorro back there. That's pretty good. All right, so let's say you had $1,000. 1/40th of $1,000 is $25. Okay, so it's really, really small. If you need it, if you were overwhelmed by looking at that and you went, I could never put all that into place at once. That's okay. Start with the top one and then work your way down. And I mean, it's not like God's in a hurry or you're in a hurry. All you're trying to do is work a framework that gets you past that anyway. So if you have to go boom, 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 no one says you have to. Nah, that's okay. I think people. So 1/40th to your pastor on $1,000 bucks. That's $25 bucks. Now 1,000 minus 25 is how much money? $975. So then you would pay you would give the first tenth of that $975 that's left to the church, which would be $97.50. And once again, my imagination needs some work because I just said pay tithes. I grew up in church, and you hear that kind of stuff. And I've heard tithe called the first fruit before, which is ridiculous because you go back and read Exodus, it was actually the last tenth. They would count it and give the last. I mean, anyway, just silly stuff that people got made up. But it was, so $97.50 would be the tithe. Because I don't want to do math in my head with decimal points, let's just call that 98, okay? So 975 minus 98 would be 877, right? And then that's when you would give the second tithe to yourself. And a tithe of 877 would be 88 bucks to yourself or to the poor, which would leave you with, it's $789. So it would leave you with $789 out of 1,000 to live, to do whatever you wanted with. And by the way, 789 is 79% of 1,000. In Leviticus, it says, here's how you should picture your finances, imagination. If your field is a square, leave the corners forgiven and live off the circle in the middle. Well, I asked a mathematician, if you put a circle inside of a square, what percentage of the square is the circle? And he said 79%. He didn't blink. It's a rule. It has to do with the ratio of pi to the side. Anyway, and if you think pi is something your mother's going to make tomorrow, it's 79%, right? So that's the real numbers. So let me run back through that again. On 1,000 bucks, 25 would be the teruma to your pastor. 98 would be your tithe to the church. 88 would be the tithe to yourself, or the poor, depending on what month it is. Yeah. All right, here comes a mic, because she's Australian. She's loud. That's so funny.
I was more going to say everyone who knows me knows I don't need a mic. How do you, or the Bible, or both, distinguish between a pastor and a church? Because the pastor works for the church.
Yeah, but a church is an organization. A pastor is a person.
Yeah,
So-
like Don versus Inspire.
Yeah. So if this is your church, if I were you, I would give my teruma to Don and my tithe to Inspire. That's the way it works. Now, that said, it's up to the board of directors at this place to do it in a legal way. You don't want to go. You don't want to bring shame upon the name of Jesus in the name of obeying something. And so they would have done that already, though. Yeah. That's why I'm here. And I can answer that. To be fair, it is incredibly difficult and fragile for a pastor to speak this himself. Even though out of an hour, how many minutes did I spend talking about teruma? 2. Yet, if he did it himself, there'd be a certain percentage of people who'd go, he asked for money for himself. And what do I have to gain from this? I'm not asking anybody to do anything for me, right? So to be fair, but there is a legal framework for that. Yeah, lady at the back.
I don't know how to frame this as a question, but I'll be interested on your reflection on it. So
Okay.
One of the key words you said about changing that thinking was investment. And so something that's helped me is, and not just around tithing money, but maybe responding to a need that you get.
Right.
God whispers in your mind, go do that.
Yeah.
And the excuses. Because I cooked a meal for a family that were in a real need.
Yeah.
And I'd said to God, okay, I'm going to commit and just start responding. I'm going to start listening to your quiet little murmurs. And he said, go make a meal for that family. Oh, no, but I work full time. I'm not a good cook. They've got allergies. But I go and I make the meal.
Right.
The thing I want to get a point across is that the text that came back from that family was, you will never know what a blessing that was our son-in-law, who's not a Christian, was so overwhelmed, he wants to say thank you to you
Right.
and other members of the church that had been helping.
Brilliant.
So what I'm getting at is that whether you tithe or whether you respond to the poor or you respond to those nudgings of God, God takes that. He has a far bigger picture and a
Correct.
far bigger investment with what he's going to do with it, isn't he?
Correct. And think about your own life. Like how many times have you described God? Like just take the word God, for instance. Like, okay, if I say God, there'd be 50 different imaginations in this room. And so the philosophers talk about there's 4 ways we talk about God. And one is really, really offensive, and the other 3 are very, very good. The offensive one, let's get that one out of the way, is super being. So, and this is primarily how most people talk about God, which is why some people they throw up in their mouth a little bit when they hear God said, or what it's because, right? Super being is somebody, whether good-hearted or not, has convinced themselves that their heart is so in tune with God that when they talk about God, they're just simply talking about themselves with a giant megaphone, right? So like in America, well, I'm a Republican, so God must be a Republican. I'm a Democrat, so God must be a Democrat. I love my guns, so God must love guns. It's that kind of thing. Or worse, I hate black people, so God must hate black people. And then you find some scripture from Genesis about Ham being cursed, and Ham went to Ethiopia, so therefore it's that super being. Super being is when I talk about God, I'm just talking about myself with a giant megaphone. I enjoy a certain style of worship, so God must. Yeah, so that's super being. And we've all experienced that. We've all done it. We've all been guilty of it, and we've all thrown up in our mouth because of it. This is the presence of God isn't in your church, Don. Well, why? Because you're not singing the right songs. That's super being. Super being is God obviously likes the songs I like, and so if you're not singing the songs I like, then God's presence has evacuated the premises. It's that kind of stuff. My idea of truth is obviously God's idea of truth. So if you don't agree with my idea of truth, then you're disagreeing with God, right? That's super being, right? Right? I think the entire book of Genesis is literal science, so God must think the entire book of Genesis is literal science. And if you don't think that, then you're anti-God, right? No, just that's super being, all that super being. Now the other 3 ways are really, really cool. The other 3 ways are hyper being. So hyper being is the idea that God is bigger than anything we can conceive, right? I am coming back to your story because I had a reason to start talking like this. So hyper being is God is bigger than anything we can conceive. In other words, if you could think of it, it's not God, right? So in this sense, in the ancient Jewish world, you weren't even allowed to say God exists, because as soon as you say God exists, it means you're limiting God to your understanding of existence. So the best way to understand hyper being is yes and. Is God love? Yes, and other things. Oh, and by the way, and whatever your concept of love is, bigger. Yeah. Is God mercy? Yes, and. Is God a provider? Yes, and. Right? So that's hyper being. The other way is ground of being. So ground of being is that God is the source of all things. Right? So that idea is that there's one God and he's holding all of us together, and because there's one God and he's holding us all together, then I should never hurt you, because if I hurt you, I'm hurting the same force holding me together, which could break me apart. Right? It's that. Ground of being is a very biblical concept. Paul talks about filling everything in every way. In him and through him are all things created. This kind of thing. Is that. And then the 4th way, and this is where I was going with this, is God as event. So God as event is something happens that we observe and we go, that was God. Right? I'll give you an example. I have a friend who feeds 1,500 people a week on Saturday. He's a very successful businessman, but he gives his Saturday to feed the poor. And he finances it all himself. Amazing guy. And there was one Saturday, this church lets them use their kitchen and stuff to do this, amazing. And there was one Saturday, he had, even after feeding everybody showed up, he had 6 meals left over. And he didn't want to go to waste, so he got in his car, drove the 6 meals to the homeless shelter. But the homeless shelter, because it was in the middle of the day, was closed. Because in the middle of the day, they asked people to go look for jobs, whatever the case may be. So he goes on. So he comes back to the church to put the meals, the 6 meals, into the refrigerator, correct? So he gets back to the church. The church is locked up, and there's 6 people on the front door. And he said, "Oh, can I help y'all?" They said, "We heard you were feeding people down here today. Are we too late?" And he went, he said, "I've got 6 meals." Exactly. And the 10-year-old boy said to his little brother, "It's okay, we're going to eat today." And when he was telling me the story, he said, "Now that's God." That's what I mean by God as event, right? And think about in your own life, how many times something crazy has happened and you went, "God heard my prayer." But that's God as event. That is something. I didn't know how I was going to pay that bill, and then I found money in the mailbox, or I didn't know what was going to happen, and then somebody showed up with groceries for a week. Or so we all interpret eventual things as God, and so what you're describing there is a way to be like God in someone's life without a Bible. Or because the person who's not a Christian, what good does go sitting over there with a Bible? But you feed them, and God's done something for everything. And the amount of people who've come to faith in God because of eventual things would be massive. So, some people come to God because of rational reason, and they were convinced by the Bible. Some people come to God because they saw someone get healed. That's eventual, right? Like you can't prove healing. I don't need to prove healing. He's walking now. Right? So, like ridiculous. Remember Jesus healed the one guy, and the Pharisees didn't like how he did it, so they asked the guy that got healed, was he a sinner? And he's like, whether he's a sinner or not, that's your category. I don't know. I just know was blind and now I see. Sin or not, I don't know. I'm just glad I can see. That's eventual. That's eventual. So really, part of how we need to repent is to repent from where we've spoke of God as super being. Where we've just applied our own values to the divine and went, "Well, this is God," and really, when we talk about God, we should be talking about God as hyper being, ground of being, or event. When we say God, that's what we should be meaning. One more.
I just had a question about organizational business tithing.
Oh, yeah.
And what your view on that was. I mean, I see that as individual tithing.
Yeah.
But I own a small business as well. And I'm just wondering.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
First, I would say don't autopsy it and don't make it a rule. If within the framework of building a generous spirit, you feel like you want to tithe from the profit of your business, it won't hurt you. It's just part of the dance. But I would say make sure you're doing it on the profit. The reason I say that is because I had one very overzealous guy decide to tithe on his gross revenue from his business, but he owned a business with very small margins that depended on lots of volume, and he was going to go bankrupt. I went to lunch with him and I said, "In your business, you can't tithe on the gross because there's not enough margin built in for you." You can't, right? I understand your heart, but you can't tithe. If you're going to do it, tithe on the profit, right? And he had an aha moment, like, I was wondering why I was struggling so bad. I thought this tithing stuff sucks, like, man, because when you only have 12% margins and you're giving 10% of the gross, good luck. So part of it is in your business, you would have certain margins built in. You know what your profit margins are. Like a restaurant, for instance, like a world-class restaurant on food is only making about 18 to 20% profit. Now on liquor, but on food, 18 to 20%. So it just depends. It depends on your business. Yeah.
I know you said no more questions.
Yep.
Tell us some good news, because media loves to tell us how bad everything is, but tell us some good news. What's happening in the world in terms of God and Christianity and the church?
Yeah. She wasn't here last night because I did this last night. But if the only problem with your question is what's happening good in the world in terms of God. Like, here's the thing, right? If there's only one God and there's only one truth, then anything that's true is God, regardless of banner. Christianity likes to lay claim to all truth, but I have a Buddhist friend who said, if I purposely hurt you, then I'm hurting God because God is in you and God is in me. Well, I don't care what banner that's under. That's true, right? It's so the world's getting better in every conceivable way. Life expectancy of Jesus' day was 32. Now it's in the 80s. That's better. They're predicting in the next 30 years that medicine will get so advanced that we'll live to 100. On average, an unthinkable thing. Like, we didn't even start living into our 50s until the 1920s. 1925 was when the average age crossed into the 50s. 1929, penicillin got invented, and wow. That's why I find vitamin salesmen hilarious. And I take lots of vitamins. I love them. But when someone's just overtly trying to profiteer on fear, like, I'll give you an example. They'll be like, your ancient ancestors stayed sexually potent till they died. They died at 32, mate. Of course they did. Like, or they'll go, big pharma's keeping secrets from you. You'll die, and you're like, mate, in 1850, if you got strep throat, you died. There's no antibiotics. In 1550, if you got strep throat, they tried to drown you to get the demon out of you. It's better. I tell you what I could do better than this. Cause I could do it funny, but if you're okay listening to somebody that you won't agree with his conclusion on purpose, but the data is really good, there is an atheist who is a PhD in scientific history, and he did a presentation at the University of California at Davis and it's called The Moral Arc, where he's talking about all the places in the world that every aspect of the world that's getting better. Life expectancy, deaths by violence, murder rates, war, and he's got artwork. He goes. Unless you're in case you're thinking the world's getting worse, and he showed pictures from history books, just from the 1500s, of people being sawn in half. They tie them upside down, and then they saw them in half from the groin down. People being. It showed a picture of Nero's impaling technique. He goes. He showed a piece of art of a bunch of Christian soldiers beheading Jews because they crucified Jesus, and that picture was in the Bible. He had an old Bible, and the artwork in the Bible showed this, and it was like, rah, right? And he's talking about, he said, look, he said, no Christian today would look at that and go, I'm glad we did that. It would be abhorrent. He said, so Christianity itself has morphed in its. Now, here's the two places you will not agree with him. And I don't mind listening to people I don't agree with. If you do not listen to him, right? But there's two places you will not agree with him. He makes this incredible case that the attitudes towards normalizing homosexuality has gotten better. But his getting better is it's becoming more acceptable, right? You won't agree with that, all right? But he shows the data on what that was. He talked about, you will agree with this, he talked about interracial marriage. In 1959, only 4% of people thought interracial marriage wasn't wrong. So like for a black person to marry a white person, only 4% in 1959 thought that was okay. Now it's 87, which makes me wonder who's the 13. But the point is that the trajectory of the graph is going well. So that the one area you won't agree with him is on homosexual behavior, or maybe you will, I don't know, but on homosexual behavior. And the other place is in his conclusion, he says the reason for all this is that evolution in science is working so well that it's literally changing the global human consciousness to kinder, better, more humane, more just, right? I think he's making the greatest case for the activity of the Spirit of the risen Christ in this world than anybody has ever made, because I can't agree with that, obviously, I can't agree with that conclusion. I would say it's evidence of the activity of the Spirit of the risen Christ in the world doing it, but the data is so solid. I'm taking all those I'm taking all of his graphs and stuff, and I'm going to integrate them because the data is the data. Now, his conclusion about why the data, I'm not with him, but the data was so good. It's about a 47-minute lecture at University of California at Berkeley, at Davis, and then it's a 30-minute Q&A. Skip the Q&A because the Qs weren't very good, but the presentation was quite good. And he does do this one thing that, honestly, if you can't laugh at this, it's you. He's obviously an atheist, and he said, and look, I have good news. I have good news for every person who's for homosexual marriage and for the legalization of marijuana at the same time. And he turned to Leviticus, and in Leviticus 20 it says, if a man lays with another man, he should get stoned. That's great. And he had a picture of marijuana plants and then two gay. It was just funny. Like, honestly, yeah. If you can't laugh at that, it's you. But the data on, like, Don, we looked at part of it today, not all of it, but like it was murder rate, deaths by war, life expectancy, slavery. Like, one that surprised me was in 1800, there was only 3 democracies in the whole world. Now there's 65. The trajectory is that way. And actually, there's a direct correlation between more democracies and less war. Because in democracies, the kings don't own the land. So there's less agenda, right? So it's just brilliant. I found him fascinating, actually. But the short answer is life expectancy, women's rights. He did this graph on women's rights. I'd have hated to be a woman back. Oh, my God. I could not believe it. I could not believe it. I could not believe. Like, there was a time in the world that a woman was not even considered a credible witness in court. She had no voice. And it wasn't that long ago. Like unbelievable. None of us were alive for it. But so people say, oh, this world's getting worse. I'm thinking, are you kidding me right now? Jesus determined to fix the world. And so, the murder rate is at an all-time low of all time. All-time low of all time. He put a graph up of deaths, of murders per 100,000 people from 1,300 to, you can't even see it in the 2050. It's so minuscule compared to then. He put up a thing on deaths by war from 1,300 till now, and it goes like this. Right? Then 1941. But it was just a quick, and even the burst in 1941, it didn't get back to the 1300s. And by the time it got to 2014, you couldn't even see it. It was flipping brilliant. Anyway, thanks, guys, for coming out tonight. To realign the night, I'm so glad that you guys were able to come out for 2 nights. Let me leave you with 3 thoughts. Don't grumble. Shine like stars. Be a part of the dance. Be a part of the dance. Be a part of the dance. Love you guys very much. I can't wait to see you again at my earliest possible convenience. Love you.